All right. John, good to meet you.
Meet you, Matthew. Excellent to be on this. I'm looking forward to not only this hangout, but sort of be following on to it. I mean, it's all story, right? Uh,
Yep.
and I mean, my story is. Um, I mean, people told me that you can't really do anything but marketing on networks, and I just felt I had to prove everyone wrong, right? And I try to just sort of tell them, sort of in theory, that's just not right? And then, yeah, but and I couldn't show them anything, right? Because everything on networks were marketing. So I just I'm possibly the worst community manager on the planet. But now there is something called a conversation community, which is kind of premised on not on marketing, but I mean, you can market there, and everyone who asks me, John, can I plug my stuff there? Yes, sure, as long as there's some conversational dimension to it. And just sort of link dumping, I usually kind of slap them on the wrists, and some of them are not happy with that. And then I try to tell them that there's 2,000 people here. I mean, here is kind of one of those strange things, right?
Sure.
You're
Sure.
really
In
not
this virtual space.
yeah, it's kind of a virtual space, and we need to be mindful of everyone's time and attention, because time and attention sort of uh, got both easier and more complex. I mean, you and I are having this conversation right now, which is, I mean, big thanks to Google and whoever puts code and whatnot together, right? I mean, the
Yeah.
whole Silicon Valley thing gets an awful lot of slack and sort of pounding, right? But really,
Yeah.
some people in Silicon Valley really did well, right? I mean, I could have
Yeah.
sent this to via snail mail or walked to California. That would have been a bit of a bother. So here we are now. But those 2,000 people, half of them I don't really like all that much. No, it's just true, right? I mean, I try to like them and they don't like me all that much back, right? It's kind of possibly a
Sure.
nicer way to say it, right?
But they're willing to argue.
Yeah. And me going on a wild rampage about Bernie Sanders and how Hillary Clinton really is dangerous. And if you really happen to love Hillary, then that doesn't sit all that well. And I can understand that. And then someone sort of messes me privately, John, you effing from Sweden, sort of shut up already, right? Because and then I try to tell them that, well, the US has a kind of a presence in 150 countries, right? And
Yeah. Yeah.
they're not all tourists, right? There's a military involved, which makes it our kind of, we got involved
Yeah.
even
You
so.
you might not have the ability to vote, but you still have an ability to speak.
Ability to sort of try to sort of be informed so we don't get bombed next, right? But anyway,
Yeah.
it's fine, right? Because America is orders of magnitude hundreds times better than many of the alternatives out there.
Sure.
I mean, we go back 1,000 years, we were Swedes, right? We were Vikings. We pillaged and plundered, and worse, right? That was our day job. We killed people, right? If you really wanted to that was a career path. You killed lots of people, right? I mean, monks in Ireland and Russians, and that's what we did. But these days, we have evolved towards, I mean, Silicon Valley kind of and Wall Street kind of won, right? Which is interesting because that is a kind of much less brutal and much less sort of destructive way of winning. And the interesting thing then with algorithms stuff that now are there, you can begin to ask the question kind of what's the next story, right? And then we go into deep learning and we go into distributed networks and we go into meta currencies and what have you, right? So uh, my hypothesis, and actually at the core reason for why I started the conversation community is I wanted to learn about a network and I needed real humans, a couple of thousand, as sort of the human equivalent of Sims, right? And this sounds really awful, and I'm kind of apologize in advance, right? But I really, I really don't I can actually discern between sims and real human beings, right? I mean, it's
At this point, yeah.
sometime a bit further ahead at least. But it's quite interesting that we tasked ourselves signaling to each other on networks, and we are only allowing ourselves to use cat gifs, selfies, and content marketing. So this makes it kind of a bit of a challenge to actually sort of communicate some kind of deeper, more complex signal. If I'm just have to use those, right? So whatever the collective intelligence is, it's still sort of beyond our individual ken, because that is, for me, almost sort of a personal affront, right? I mean, let's say we take Leonardo da Vinci here, right? And he would sort of get a hold of a tablet, a good tablet, right? Powerful one, good graphics, and a sort of writing thing. And he would just love that, right? And then he would go on, whoa, everyone could do what I did, right? With the sixth, well, no, not the 16th chapter, that was Michelangelo. But I mean, uh, Mona Lisa and more, right? And then we
Sure,
go on
all the
to ask, okay,
inventions.
so what are you guys doing, right? Kind of surprise me, kind of dazzle me. No, we're doing chat and cat gifts, right? And that would just absolutely kill him, right? That
Maybe, yeah.
you have this and you're doing that, right? So I mean, that's kind of my perspective, that we have these tools. There's 1 billion of us connected, and
Hmm.
we are arguing about whether we should elect someone like Trump as American president, which is um, the weird thing is he might actually be a good president, because he's kind of probably stupid enough to realize that he's that stupid and sort of completely unfit, and he would sort of get a hold of really great advisors, and that would work really well. So, I mean, democracy is really messy. We've done that in Europe, by the way, so you shouldn't be ashamed at all, because we have done Berlusconi and really weird characters in all the European countries, one after another, right?
Yeah.
The current prime minister in Sweden is kind of surplus to requirement compared to who we had before, right? So that's not the problem. The problem I see is we are not making optimal use of whatever Silicon Valley, Wall Street, Paris, London. I mean, in Sweden, there's such a averse climate to anything digital network. So 500,000 Swedes, the brightest best, they're living in London, Tokyo, San Francisco, New York,
Hmm.
and they're not doing almost anything that is sort of a benefit to Sweden. I mean, obviously, further on, you could say that, well, screw Sweden, right? I mean, that's just 9 million people, sort of forget about those, right? And
Yeah.
that would be hard for me to sell here in Sweden, right? Kind of just forget it, right? You're going to be something else quite soon. But America is another thing, right? There's 300 million of you. You won, right? There's kind of no arguing around that. There was this big power thing and you won. But by winning, and I mean military, financially, politically, culturally, the universe now is kind of giving some creative pushback, right? So, okay, you won. Now you level up, right? Okay, so what's that? Well, you need to figure that out, right?
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing. And uh, it's just a wonderful twist of the universe that Elon Musk, who is one of your brightest best, just happens to be an illegal immigrant, right? I mean, I just love that twist, right? That, okay, so, I mean, somehow you found it within you that you didn't throw him back from wherever he came, right? So, and I mean, this is a comforting thing, right? In a pure theocracy or in a pure bureaucracy in Europe, that wouldn't have worked. Silicon Valley didn't happen in Europe. It could have, but it didn't.
Hmm.
So, and there's also this whole integral thing that plays into this, right? I mean, in California, you're doing yoga, mindfulness. I mean, this is good stuff.
And rock and roll.
Rock and roll.
And the hippies.
Right next to you
There's
did hippies, and then right next to you did Burning Man, which is still kind of one of those moonshots that is still to sort of really sort of pay off. And however that will happen, right? And
it's no accident that you end up seeing this crazy culture of innovation um, springing out of the the remnants of hippie culture and rock and roll and all of those pieces.
Now, I mean, I'm grateful that through luck mostly and connections, I ended up in something called Brainstorms, which is an online community started already in 1998. I got in there 2001. I'm still a member. Now it's got a bit of a long in the tooth because I mean, we grew old, right? And Facebook and Twitter happened, so why bother staying there? But I mean, I'm staying there because it was kind of my bit of a school, right? I mean, an informal school, learning what's an American subtext. I mean, first I actually didn't know how to sort of express myself in English. I didn't know anything about the codes, so they made an awful lot of fun of me, right? Because I was Swedish, and so they could sort of do really kind of choice select American intelligent Jewish slurs, right? That no one else on the planet can do as well as they can, right? And
Okay.
I'm saying this fondly, right? Because this is kind of, if you've sort of been crushed completely and then you sort of, they still like you, right? That's kind of what they do, right? I mean, we do similar things in Sweden when we sort of graduate from high school and things like that. We awful nasty stuff, right? So kind of throwing people in the mud and stuff. Right? So it's what you do, right? It's kind of the human thing. But these days, I mean, my kids are doing Instagram and Snapchat. I don't, because I would be like kind of a lost kitten if I did, right? So I know sufficient about these newfangled tools. I know that, whoa, if I go there, I will make an absolute fool of myself. I mean, I could sort of do the tools, right, as an old guy, but kind of it would show, right? I mean, you know how, I mean, there's an age difference between you and me. If I would sort of tag along you to some of your, I'm not even sure if I can call it digs without showing my age, right? I mean, but some scenes where you go and you could sort of pass along possibly because you're younger, right? And I could possibly survive the ordeal if I would just shut up and not say anything to anyone there, right? So these things happen, and increasingly so they become an issue because we're connected, right? A billion of us already. So, I mean, to jump forward to what I'm doing, you could possibly distill it down to, I actually distill it down because a client just asked me and I was sort of got tired of not being able to explain what I'm actually doing. So I just wrote it down, right? So, I mean, the short word is just one word, right? Cards, right? I do cards. That's what I do. And obviously clients ask, well, what's that, right? Well, in my case, it's principles underlying inspired thinking, generative relating, and proactive doing. And then suddenly most clients are saying, whoa, that was way too much information. Right?
Inspired thinking, generative relating, and proactive doing.
Yeah, because on one end of the card, whether it's a physical or digital card, it's just a title and a text, and you put them together and they form stories. So that's kind of very simple. Underneath, there's a pattern language and a finite set. So the back side of the card can sort of talk with a database and eventually, I hope, a year or two off with a deep learning algorithm, which means that you could begin to make friends with your own digital self eventually, because what sort of connective tissue is just conversations and stories. So this is why I mentioned the Sims thing with the conversation with you, right? Because I really wanted to figure out what's a network and how does it work. So I thought that it was going to be difficult because both Google and Facebook are sort of squirreling away most of the data, which is a bit of a bother if you actually want to understand what's going on, because most of it is just sort of, it's gone already, right? It's like coming to a crime scene and someone sort of cleaned up half of the stuff and you can't really sort of you couldn't make any good conclusions because half the stuff is gone already. But it turned out I could sort of make inferences and field test patterns and stuff. So now there is kind of a field tested version. So, and that part is simple. People have situations, let's call them, and don't ask me to explain situations because that's you don't need you don't want to encourage me because then I should go on for hours just to define what I mean with the situation. But typically most people understand that, right? They go into a business meeting, or they go into a relationship, or they face a complex business issue, or
find themselves in a particular context.
Yeah, yes, that's a great way of putting it. Now, that's step one, which what they bring to sort of the game table with the cards and the board. Step three, going out there, there's an increased flow somehow. Decision quality, better sense making, whatnot, anything, right? Next steps, seeing things from a new angle. And in between, there's the cards. And they are just options. And that actually took me a couple of years to distill it down to kind of, because people would ask me kind of, okay, so what are the cards really, right? And since I had the principles, it was fairly easy to see that when you apply those inspired thinking, narrative relating, proactive doing, you get different and hopefully slightly better options. But it's kind of an iterative thing, so you can't really be sure until you do it. It's kind of it's like asking an entrepreneur to provide a perfect universal theory for what they're doing. It boils down to some sort of fingerspitzengefühl, art, intuition, guts, feeling, the lay of the land, all kinds of things. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, some of the stuff can be repeated. Right? Once you have figured out, here's clients, they have a need, I can fulfill that need in a very innovative way. Let's charge the hell out of the client before they realize that what happened really. Right? So that part is kind of the same, right? But that I can actually remember, kind of tell you a story how sort of difficult it is. In 2007, I got hold of my first iPhone. And for me, it was that little bounce when I scrolled down, 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 down. It just bounced, stopped, right? That was it, right? Suddenly all the other, I mean, they were good, right? The previous phones I had, right? But none of them did that. Because I could feel that someone had loved this little machine and the software inside to the point of having put that in, right? So, I mean, I've tried to replicate it somehow. And when a new person comes in and says the first things in the conversation community, which is scary, right? Because some of them are introvert. They have sort of polished a short little post or comment for months sometimes, right? I mean, I know that because I ask them. I almost invariably heap lavish praise on them, right? I mean, absurd amounts of praise. They have put something together which is kind of more or less English, right? And nothing kind of earth-shattering, but good. I just invariably say, fantastic, right? And they get that is sort of the intention, right? So they suddenly feel welcome. Because digital, that's kind of what I learned from Brainstorms, that, I mean, Brainstorms, we have basically two rules. You own your own words, which is kind of the whip part, right? You better don't be stupid in here, right? Because there's others who will tell you that you were. The other is when still people do that, because we do, right? We're stupid. You have the other rule, which was instigated by Rangel, which I love, which is assume goodwill. Now, we had a couple of years of meta thrash, what that really means, but that is also fun to just, okay, so what do you mean with assume goodwill? Should you assume goodwill someone who's really offensively stupid and repeatedly so, right? Yeah, if you can, right? If you can find inside of you to do that might actually be good. So, but the only sort of quibble I have with Howard is kind of the online community thing. I mean, mind you, that was great because that was 1998. That was the dark ages, right? There was nothing like that back then, right? Now we have, so when people ask me, oh, so you're doing online community? No, the organizing metaphor for the conversation community is a way station. And then I have to explain what's that, right? Well, you stay for shorter or longer duration, but you should feel that you have an evolution trajectory through it, right? You shouldn't sort of stay there indefinitely because that's not good, right? And there's loads of research why that is so, because the virtual space really is virtual. We have different speeds, different ways of cognition, different lines of inquiry we want to pursue, and to sort of cram all that into one space and just call it, now we're going to sort of be here. It's just a recipe for eventual sort of, it can be go to disaster or balkanization or slow decline, or everyone is kind of going passive aggressive light. I mean, there's loads of things that can happen and do happen, right? I mean, in Brainstorms we're good because we've sort of lived through all kinds of weird stuff, right? Which is weird because it's just text. It's basically just text. It's nothing else. So I brought along some of those. Now, why why way station? Why sort of bother with inventing a metaphor? Well, because Wall Street and Silicon Valley are way stations writ large. There's movement there, right? It's not standing still. With all the warts and foibles, it's kind of really great social artifacts. Burning Man is kind of a new one that hasn't really kind of coalesced yet as much as those have, right? But you can go back, the Viennese coffee shops in Vienna, where all the quantum physicists met. There's even a picture of them, 100 of them, they just met at the same place and whipped up quantum mechanics, which is amazing, right? They sat there, had coffee and invented kind of science, right? Which is just fantastic. And then the Parisian cafes, right? They did Impressionism and then Cubism and then loads of stuff, right? In a couple of decades. And they were sitting there having coffee. Well, most of them had way more than coffee, but I mean, because they were artists, right? So, and they are wasted, right? Because then they just sort of went off and, I mean, we had a Swedish guy, Ivan Ageli. He made himself a Russian name just to piss his father off. And then went to Egypt, and then he got into theosophy and even more weird stuff. And then brilliant paintings, and thankfully some of them are actually remaining. So I went to the exhibit yesterday in Stockholm, in Sweden, where they had a joint exhibition, Ivan Egli and Paul Klee, another one of those kind of contemporary German guy. You could say abstract painting. And it's still vibrant, as if they were sort of painted them yesterday. And particularly Paul Klee, he had kind of one of those brown triangles approaching square angles, he calls one of the painting. And there's no brown in the painting, by the way. So it's kind of just him being really crazy and wants to just have put us on, right? He just wants to make fun of us who are watching the painting. And then he wants us to think. So, and that is what I see now and then glimpses of. When you reply to that Monica Anderson thread, by the way, yes, the other day in about artificial intelligence, I saw glimpses of that, right? So I communicated with Monica, and I'm going to ping Matthew, and he's really clever. Reply as if he is, right? So sometimes I do these things because I can just sense that these two guys should meet. I haven't got the faintest clue of the sort of analytics of that, right? I just know that if I sort of bash these two together, there should be sparks, and some of them will be really good. So I do. And then half of the time I'm obviously wrong, right? And it's kind of an embarrassment, but I can really live with that. It's kind of not a problem at all. Because when
I actually have,
yeah.
We had a good little back and forth there in that thread, and I actually have a follow-up that I've been meaning to write, but I just haven't had time. I've been working on other things, and
yeah.
But yeah, it's it's interesting because for me, so I would say I'm a communications and political theorist. I normally describe myself as a political philosopher, but I focus pretty significantly on the relationship between individuals and groups, and how the tools and processes that they have for communicating influence their ability to thrive, to regulate themselves, to adapt to new circumstances, etc. And but despite that, I don't communicate that much.
I can sort of understand that. I mean, I could let you in on. I mean, according to sort of my horoscope, my chart, right? I should probably have been a politician already by now, right? It's kind of all there, right? Talking too much and ability to influence people, and I can sort of quote anything from Deleuze to Max Weber and anything in between. So I would be a formidable force in politics, right? But I made a decision early on that, please, Lord, can you spare me so I can do something else, right? And sometimes when you do, I mean, it's like the universe can actually hear you and sort of, okay, you go do other stuff. My older sister, she went into Brussels, I mean, member of parliament and all that, right? And I mean, the horror stories, right? I mean, this is kind of, on the surface, decent people in Brussels and Strasbourg, right?
Sure.
You wouldn't see from the outside that these are monsters, right? So, I mean, that alone is kind of worth a couple of books, just to, how do you tell a human being from a monster? Well, you need to look at it a certain way, just so, and then you can see that, yeah. The trouble is that those monsters didn't sort of start being that, right? It's kind of, they got into the machine and somehow it sort of, they turned funny.
Yeah.
I mean, Donald Trump was probably a very decent, although a bit loud 2-year-old, right? Once, right? And now this, right? So kind of something happened in between, right? So I fully understand and honor your if at all possible. I mean, politics really eventually will be kind of a thrivability affordance. It really will be, right? But we aren't there yet.
No.
I mean, the Machiavellian protocol is so eminently useful still. So, and as soon as a number of people are continuing to use that, it's very difficult to sort of, let's not do that, right? It's very hard for them to let go of something that works so well, right?
Yeah.
So
you have a bit of a game theory type issue, a prisoner's dilemma type issue there.
Yeah, I mean, what's the optimization? Tit for tat with occasional generosity, right?
Mm.
I mean, then you could sort of iterate that, sort of an ongoing tit for tat, occasional serendipitous generosity, because networks, and then long-term strategic outcome, generativity. But then you need to sort of do all kinds of scaffoldings because other people, right? I mean, half of them that I really don't like all that much. So I need to sort of always sort of be prepared to, let's not throw these guys out because I just don't happen to like them. I go by the data, go by the algorithms, right? Which then is risks turning weird, because then is it me or is it my algorithms that decides? Right? That's a good question, by the way. It's kind of, ask me when I know with precision. I don't know really still, because the algorithms aren't really good enough.
Right? Yeah, I could dive into that, but I'll make 2 points. One,
yeah.
I've known for a long time that the thing that, like you had said, the thing that I was suited to do was to be a communicator, right? And at the same time, you know, the traditional paths for somebody like that, such as going into politics, didn't interest me, because I could already see early on in my life that entering into those institutions wasn't going to allow me to affect the change I wanted to make in the world. It was going to turn me into hamburger meat for that machine, basically. And so, I set to task kind of working on how do you redesign that machine being our political, our economic systems, just like a whole bunch of other people within some of these online communities. And but for being somebody who focuses on that stuff and who recognizes that my sort of the things that I am good at really suit me for assuming a role as I want to say a thought leader, but that's not really the right word, but just a contributor, right? Like as somebody who can go, hey, here's how some of this stuff works, and we could do it differently, and here's why that other way would work better, right?
Yeah.
So despite that feeling like what I should go do, it's been hard for me over the years to do that. And some of that has to do with perfectionism and being a workaholic and all these things. But the result is I have not had much presence in those conversations in the past. Meaning I've just withheld participating, in part because I wanted to be doing other things, in part because I am by nature I overemphasize, I guess would be the way to frame it. Like, I really don't like being misunderstood. Yeah. I think it's part of why I tend to be a fairly clear communicator. It's because my dislike of being misunderstood leads me to invest really heavily in trying to clarify my meaning and to articulate it clearly.
No, I mean, it's very clear to me that you're a really brilliant communicator, and I'm a decent communicator, and I just got lucky. And I mean, if you would compare with my sisters, I'm the silent one, right? So they're terrible. Right? They can sort of talk the ears off of anyone, right? But kind of a decent bunch anyway. So, but the thing is, with me, it's a bit similar to your kind of the perfectionism thing, right? It's kind of, I can think in really large diagrams, and that combined with I can think really quickly. I mean, I can almost sort of access intuition sort of consciously, which is, I'm kind of, if I would be even weirder, they would probably put me away, right? Let's put it that way. So, but knowing that, and then you have the sort of obvious constraint that there's no use with that if you're just doing the mentat, right? That's sort of to borrow this from the Dune trilogy. Right?
If you're just doing the what?
The mentat. There's the guy in I mean in the Dune trilogy by Frank Herbert, a science fiction trilogy. There's a kind of desert planet, and they are fighting about it, and there's they destroyed all the computers, right? So they have people doing that instead, mentats, right? So you can think really quickly and sort of analyze a couple of gazillion data sets and then come up with here's the analysis, right? Very handy. I mean, it's just an alternative universe, but knowing that you can pretty much outthink anyone else, and also realizing that that is of almost no use at all if you can't make a difference. I mean, so one of the reasons why this whole community thing, right? Because I wanted to sort of do that and see, and just throwing stuff out and see, okay, so they did understand that they liked, and so because what I'm after is, I mean, simplifying it enormously, the whole TIMN thing, right? Tribe, institutions, market, networks. And I'm pretty sure that we are transitioning from markets to network. It's just that it's not linear. So there's large amounts of tribe and institution in there as well. So
and there will continue to be.
yeah.
Yeah.
I've talked with some 25-year-olds who are sort of happy doing community hubs in Berlin, and they're doing neo tribes, and they're doing this and that, and great stuff, right? And I try to tell them that please don't do all the mistakes that we've already done, right? And obviously they're going to sort of do almost all of those mistakes that we've already done. But I mean, at least there's a potential in networks to share knowledge. I mean, so that simplifying it just in a network-centric view, uh, the one of the things I'm most passionate about is to what will happen if we change network gradually from now it's just kind of a marketing platform, kind of a free-for-all content marketing slugfest, right? Uh, to a network that is even the algorithms would be an ongoingly better designed to augment knowledge logistics. And the thing to do that is to access that via conversation. I mean, real conversations. I mean, where you actually can communicate back and forth, dialogue, if you will. And story then becomes sort of conduits, vessels, channels for the knowledge, right? So if I would do, I mean, in the back of my mind, there's also pattern language. So if I have good knowledge how to do this and that, and I also know how to sort of extricate some good viable patterns, and then I can give them to you, and then you can sort of repackage, recontextualize them, and then you can get them to work. And then we also need to sort of have a back and forth when you do that, so I can sort of possibly help you along with that. Then, um, interesting enough, uh, systems thinking, which sort of got bad press for a couple of decades, is now kind of slowly doing some kind of comeback thing, right? And I had a meeting just the other week, the very brilliant woman, and she told me that, John, uh, living systems has something to do with a context of mutual learning. And to me, that was kind of a revelation, because that was in my mind that, whoa, thank you, finally, someone who has sort of distilled it down to something I can actually use. Because she's kind of spent 20 years of her life getting to that, right? So it
Yeah.
sounds simple, but it packs a
But
punch.
it's based on some deep, profound explorations and insights. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of that shuhari thing, right? Where you start with just, if you look at art, right? You can look at art and it's wonderful because you're just looking at it and you don't know anything about art. And then you sort of do the artsy-fartsy thing in the middle, that's sort of step 2 or 3, and you go all expressionism and funky stuff, right? And then step 3, you return to that simplicity. But you can get so much more out of it because you're there. You're really consciously choosing to look at clay rather than Monet or whatever it is, right? So suddenly your perfectionist mind gets its full due as well. But it's not just perfectionism in itself, it's kind of a stepping stone towards, for lack of a better word, you could call it essential character, I think. I mean, I'm happy with any which way of describing it, but there seems to be in us, innate in us, something that we're not sort of fully satisfied until we're sort of given it our all. I mean, this is the most sad I am is when I meet people and they used to have settled, right? They know that they could do twice as much, and they just won't, right? I mean, sometimes I whack them on the side of the head because that's just who I am, and then it's just sort of shenanigans ensues, right? But uh, now these days I've sort of gotten older, and then I usually manage to sort of restrain myself not doing that. Right? But sometimes you have. I mean, I can give you a wonderful story. My religion teacher in high school, she said, "Wouldn't all the people in India have been better off if they just sort of gone evangelical Christian?" And I couldn't for the life of me shut up, right? So I just told her that they managed really damn well for a couple of 1,000 years until we came along. Right? So, um, yeah. So I won't tell you more of that story because it's kind of. But I managed to get away, right? Because I was friend with some of the other teachers, so I got into trouble as a kid now and then, but bygones mostly. But I mean, the ability to question things, the ability sort of to doubt. I mean, people kind of think that's a bad thing. It's not, right? worry, doubt, question things, those are good things, right? And it's just that it can't be a thing in itself, right? It's like the Monty Python sketch, right? But we're not having an argument. You're just saying, you're gainsaying me. No, I'm not. It's kind of one of those sketches, right? Where the argument needs to be a good one, right? You need to sense that someone is actually right and you're actually wrong, and that's a good thing. And then again, character, right? You can sort of relax into that, right? So, but all of this is, I mean, this is the wonderful thing, right? I mean, if you ever met me 10 years ago, I would have been insufferable. I mean, I'm partly insufferable now also, but I mean, then I would have absolutely known that I knew everything about everything. And you could
Sure.
just, hi, I'm John, ask me anything. I could have just worn the t-shirt, right? But these days, I probably know more now, but I know more enough. So I know that I know very, very little. Right? So the Feynman realization that you make a tiny little dent in some corner of the universe, and that's it, right? That's really good. So, and so for me, it's kind of opening up the laptop and or the smartphone and just connecting with 1 billion others. It's kind of like Christmas every day, right? Because there's stuff going on. I mean, there's stuff in neuroscience that's happening now that didn't exist a year ago. So I think I just got lucky to be alive at this particular juncture, right? I mean, obviously, we're also a bit stupid to be alive at this particular juncture because it's kind of, we are rebuilding everything from scratch right in mid-flight, which is.
So I'll dive in there.
Yeah.
I got to go to a winter solstice dinner with a couple of with some friends, and a few of those people are, you may even know some of them, but I won't mention names. But a few of those people are some of the world's leading experts on cryptography and security, and I'm helping to ordinance for this fall, and it's on disruptive technologies, blah blah blah. I'm just sort of getting roped in to help with some introductions and maybe some content organizing stuff. But one of the topics that they were planning to cover is right now labeled cybersecurity, and that this is an important thing for the future, and and I'm going, that's the wrong word. It's not about cybersecurity. It's about, I don't know if this is the right word to sell it as a marketing thing, but it's really about digitally facilitated trust, right? And these folks that I was having dinner with are experts in that realm. And their focus is not, oh, how can we protect what we already have through technology? No. It's, wow, if we were able to interact in these trustworthy ways digitally, what are the new capacities that are able to be built on top of that? What else? What can emerge? And at that dinner, they sort of have this is an annual ritual where they kind of go and, okay, what are the things you're grateful for from the last year, and what are you ready to let go of, and what are you looking forward to? And one of the pieces that I said I was looking forward to, that I was grateful for, really at the end of the day, was what am I grateful for? Was that we're here while it's all changing, right? Literally, and that even though that's scary, it's also really fun. That it's something you can lose yourself in, and it's exciting. And I, a good number of the folks that I work with are deep enough in that they actually can see the ways that these systems are changing, and how, oh man, if you just put a thumb on the scale here, we might get some really useful outcomes. And so yeah, I see that. Yes, I see disruption and all of that as the pain part. I'm not grateful for. Right? There's always some amount of pain in transition, and that part I'm not necessarily celebrating. That people are going to have a hard time. Um, but I am celebrating and excited about the opportunity to try to build better, more functional systems. And my background, really the stuff that drives me in this direction, is the belief that our system, especially on a global scale, isn't functional. Like, we don't have a functional regulatory system. And I don't mean regulatory as in like legislation. I mean regulatory as in ability to balance.
Yeah, I mean,
And
yeah, true. The cybernetics is off. Right? I mean, I
yeah,
spent years and years in reading Gregor Bateson. I thought I knew Gregor Bateson because I just read the whole damn thing, right? Then I returned some years later and I realized that sort of the young, obnoxious know-it-all me actually did understand a whole lot of sort of the theory, just that the Gregory Bateson stuff really reveals itself as being really useful when you look at it from a kind of a practical wisdom phronesis kind of applicability lens, right? And suddenly, and this is weird, right? I'm still in the process of doing that, right? Because that word, that symmetry, the context of mutual learning, and I told the woman that told that to me, that kind of, gee, thanks, because now there's a seismic thing going on in my brain, and half of the stuff I thought I knew was just obsolete, and I can sense that, right? Now that was kind of painful, and she just laughed, right? And it was a good laugh, by the way. It's kind of just, we had one of those moments, right, where she was happy to sort of have had that effect on someone else, right?
sure.
Someone actually just bother with that very abstract thing, context and mutual learning. So I did that, and then I went back and reread the stuff, and suddenly I saw, hey, this is, he has figured out part of the cybernetics, part of a sort of a better sort of handshake protocol in between us and whoever is going to follow us. And if we do that, the odds actually will improve. It's just that, um, I mean, the challenges are quite formidable because, on one hand, you could say Donald Trump is a great example because he's kind of one of the supernova brown dwarf stage of the old narrative. So he's actually doing an invaluable service to the American psyche, just lancing the boil of xenophobia and misogyny and loads of other
Yep.
things. But uh, the challenge for us is then to not automatically just, oh, uh, bad hillbillies, rednecks, bad persons overall, right? Not only are they really fat, they are offensively stupid as well. I mean, and you could go on
Sure.
and on, right? And
Sure.
if you
It's
go
easy
to
to
the
turn them into an other. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, and then you go into that meeting with that kind of disposition, you'll probably get beat up and worse, right? So
Yeah.
that really doesn't help. But if you see that this is kind of a rite of passage almost, right? And even though the the Sanders supporters are uh, nicer because of Bernie Sanders, right? I mean, even the bloody yellow finch came and landed on his podium, which is one of those hallelujah moments, which really moved me when I saw it, right? I just thought, whoa, that was deep, right? But still, that's also kind of a collective frenzy further, which we need to level up beyond. Now suddenly becomes really, really hard. So kind of now I sort of discounted Trump and his followers for obvious reasons. If I'm honest with myself and actually perform the full analysis, I need to discount Bernie Sanders for slightly similar reasons. I mean, populism. Now, I'm left with a couple of really crazy guys and a woman, right? I mean, she's obviously not crazy. She's really smart, but she's completely bought and paid for. They even trotted her up with bloody Henry Kissinger, so she can't deny sort of the connection, right? So now they have her, right? That's kind of an old trick, by the way. We did that long time ago in Europe. We perfected that, right? Trot them up with someone really hideous so they can't sort of go on record and say that, no, I didn't know. Yeah, you did, because we have the picture right here, this. So now we own you. Nice little trick. But if we continue with analysis now and see that, okay, so let's elect Hillary then, right? 4 years. And allow the momentum to build. And then, if at all possible, we can apply some select meta Buckminster Fulderian trim tabs here and there, right? I mean, who knows? We might actually make it. But it's kind of touch and go, because I mean, the tools we have, we soon have deep learning algorithms. I mean, I give you an example. Let's say we build a distributed network, similar to Facebook, but much better. And you and I sort of put some posts in to sort of get things started, and people start to comment. The algorithm could then be designed. So if someone just says "attaboy," sort of the death by anodyne, right? You sort of nice thing, right? The algorithm will say, no, you will actually have to pay for non-committal, vapid, useless responses, right? So if you do that, there's an invoice coming, right? Because now you're just consuming, right? You're not participating. And then if you would participate, the algorithm would then reward you. And then it's kind of, you put in a really great comment on our post, it would say kashing. I mean, not much, but I mean, I don't know, $1 or $2. I mean, and then suddenly people would realize that, hey, I can sort of make some money on being a really, really great human being. I mean, this is, you hear, right? This is very crude. But suddenly people would realize that it actually matters how you participate, how you behave, um, how you fulfill your civic duties, even digitally. I mean, there's only our imagination can sort of set the limits for what you actually could do. I mean, because this was just a first crude thing, right? And then you could, I mean, you could be happy with just, no, I'm just going to sort of consume pithy quotes and pretty pictures, right? Thank you. So bring me the invoice because I'm just bored, silly, and just want to do that, right? Yeah, okay. That's the option. If you want to do kind of the full Viennese thought leader conference digitally, you'll get paid. And the algorithm will sort of sort out some of that, right? I mean, you couldn't sort out all of it, but some of it.
Can I play the role of a heretic here?
Yeah, sure. Love that.
So I believe that Facebook is so very popular because it allows us to gossip.
Yeah.
And it turns out that we are wired to love gossip, because gossip, well, let me frame it differently. Because the people who loved gossip, their communities worked really well. They regulated themselves very effectively when those communities were small tribes. Yeah. And so we are the descendants of people, and thus we have the biological inheritance. We have the genes of people who love to gossip. Those people, because they loved to talk about one another, who was good at what, who was bad at what, etc., that those communities were able to regulate themselves really well. And because of that gossip-based regulatory system, they were able to live in larger groups and benefit from the specialization that happens when you live within larger groups.
Yeah, virtuous cycle. Yes.
Yeah, and so I guess one of my assumptions going into all of this work is that we're not going to change that human DNA in the near term, right? I might be wrong there. There were some gene hacking stuff that came out a week or so ago. They were talking about going and doing gene alteration in HIV cells, right? Where they literally like are able to get this portion of a piece of DNA edited. So hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe we're able to alter our genetic code in the near term. Don't know about that, right? Like, I think that it's going to be a while before we change human nature. If to the extent that human nature is based on our biological inheritance, right, is based on the needle of contexts that we happened to have threaded through, and are currently shaped by, right, all of those inheritances. We've got to, I guess the way to frame this is, if we want to build a better world, trying to create better humans actually isn't the path. Trying to alter human nature isn't the path. And this was something hard for me. Like, I came to this conclusion reluctantly, because for a long time it's like, if we could just be better, if we could just, if only people would, want to talk about high discourse, then. And eventually what I realized was, no, that's not a realistic path to a better world, because we're not going to be able to make that change in the near future. But what we can do is we can alter our institutions, our structures, in ways that actually work with how humans really work.
Yeah. Now,
framed one way, the simple version that you just gave of the algorithm, sort of whacking people with a stick, a fine for contributing uselessly to the discourse, or rewarding them for contributing in useful ways. I see that as that type of, we can tweak the knobs here. Yeah. And this may end up being the most useful point that I make in this whole conversation, so it might take a moment to get out, but I'm going to try. The problem with that is that it hands off the judgment about what is a useful contribution to a central actor. That central actor may be the algorithm, but it's still a central actor. Yeah. And in any complex adaptive system, whether it's an online community or a forest, you have two things that are always in tension. You have the efficiency benefits that come from centralizing behavior around what you've figured out works best in the past, right? So the efficiency gains that come from centralization, and that ends up always being in tension with the resilience benefits that come from diversity. Yeah. So you have this efficiency / centralization versus diversity and resilience. So efficiency versus resilience. You need both.
Yeah. And it needs to be kind of in a living dynamic balance, back and forth, or constantly.
That's right. And the appropriate balance of centralization versus diversity shifts constantly, right? It really does. And it depends on context. And when things are stable, when the environment that you are operating within isn't changing very much, the learnings that you have accumulated over time, you can rely upon them and can more profitably centralize your behaviors to be based in the accumulated wisdom, right, of your prior experience. But when your context is changing pretty quickly, the usefulness of that accumulated wisdom goes down.
Yeah, and then you unlearn, and then because otherwise you won't have.
And usually the way that happens in a natural world is you die off, and something else comes to replace you. And those are not only natural systems. It's not just like, oh, that's nice because that's how nature does it. I don't see nature as nice. I see nature as pretty brutal. But what it does is it points out, wow, okay, I'm going to take a second and just backtrack a touch.
Yeah.
a year ago, I was doing a fair bit of consulting work. And most of the consulting work that I end up doing has to do with organizational structure, corporate cultures, values, social processes, right? How can you design an organization or change your organization in ways that enable it to thrive, especially in ways that enable it to thrive in amidst changing circumstances. Since we all are existing within a world that's changing more rapidly. And most of my clients are publicly traded companies. Sometimes they are startups. But I was doing a fair bit of that stuff. And I knew deep down, as I had mentioned earlier, that the role that I needed to play in this bigger picture stuff was sort of one of communicator. And I had figured out a whole bunch of things. A lot of that, a lot of the stuff that I had figured out kind of ties into why I'm working with the meta-currency team on Schutte and those types of designs for the way I'll frame that whole project, that whole endeavor is we're trying to re-architect the internet in ways that can enable communities to self-regulate at global scale, right? So if I'm going to sum it up, that's that project. But a year ago, I went, okay, I need to take some time and really dive back into political philosophy. But in order to do so, I want to look at natural systems. I want to look at how natural systems function, because I think that it's going to be easiest for me to tell the story I need to tell if I can point at how we are leveraging the learnings that we're pulling from natural systems. And so I set up a little Airbnb at my house to offset the lost income from the consulting work. And I basically went surfing and kite surfing and did what I call thought work, right? I would just puzzle through things as I would go and play, essentially. And I basically did a deep dive into ecosystems, and my goal was to figure out what are the patterns that thrive in nature.
Yeah.
If you can pull it back to what are the abstract patterns that over billions of years have proven most effective at organizing. I would frame it differently as what are the most effective organizing patterns, right? And that proved to be a really fruitful journey for me. Figured out a bunch of different things, ended up leaving my religion that I've been raised in as a result.
That's how you know that it's really powerful, right?
Yeah. And I still...
I was brought up kind of lukewarm Lutheran of agnostic Christian, because everyone in Sweden is, right? And then I went on to do astrology and Taoism and Patanjali yoga and chakras and God knows what else, because that's what you did in Sweden in the 90s, right? Now that I really don't know, right? I mean, I try to sort of be a human, whatever that is. But I did a couple of years now and still doing, which is why it's so immensely fun for me to listen to you, because I did via evolutionary biology somewhere in there and continue to do that via biosemiotics, which is kind of the outgrowth of Gregor Bateson. And pretty much came up with and connecting one of those things you mentioned that was really, really profound. The whole I mean, if we get better, significantly better at sort of organizing ourselves, improving ourselves, I mean, weighing in all that sort of our sort of social biological makeup, we can actually begin to look at metaphors And these metaphors can be continuously informed by nature. I mean, there's a central hypothesis in biosemiotics that basically says uh, life and science are coextensive, which I'm still grappling with. Uh,
Hmm.
your image sort of went kablooey, but that's okay. This Google is doing shenanigans, I think. Um, the and from my work of doing um, leadership development, team development, basically telling them to be rediscovering to be human again towards themselves and towards others. Uh, there are paths that seem to be evolutionary. So there's very interesting synergies here when you mention about design, enable, thrive amidst changing circumstances. That's exactly what I arrived at from a very different direction.
Mm.
So that tells me that there's something there because the chances that you and I would sort of arrive at almost exactly the same thing from very different directions and being very different people is no.
Yeah.
Uh,
That was
well,
kind of the same experience for me with when I met Arthur and Eric. Right, we had started from very different places and had kind of landed on the same same basic framework for how you would need to restructure the internet um, in order to enable communities to sort of thrive at the way I frame it is to thrive at the scales at which we operate today. Right, humans had a built-in regulatory system.
yeah,
It's that whole gossip reputation thing that works. It really works at tribal scale, right? It really works at like 150 person scale.
yeah,
And we invented other institutions, money and a sovereign and democracy and capitalism and securities regulations and all of these other things, corporate fiduciary duties, these are all innovations
yeah,
that improved our abilities to function at larger and larger scales. And many of those did that by giving us major efficiency gains at those
yeah,
larger scales.
yeah,
But they did so also at a cost of sort of resilience, and they did so often in ways that worked counter to, as you put it, our human nature, right? They end up being good for the community, the group as a whole, often at the expense of individuals, whether that's individuals
yeah,
being sacrificed, literally, like in some earlier civilizations, or individuals leading lives that they don't find fulfilling and meaningful, and all of that, as is often the case within modern bureaucratic organizations. And and so when I met Arthur and Eric and dove into what it was that they were trying to build, it was like sort of like you're saying right now. Oh my gosh, somebody else
yeah,
sees what I
yeah,
see.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the flow thing. I mean, uh, even a very simple living organism is kind of okay. That worked, so I'm going to do a little bit more than that. Okay, so that really didn't work. I'm going to do less of that. So kind of a very just kind of. I mean, this is a very interesting thing with our sort of whole neocortex, which some think was just one big evolutionary mistake. But I absolutely don't ascribe to that. I used saying
Mm.
we haven't sort of developed sort of the culture where to deal with it, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
I've actually sort of explored that via. I mean, you can actually go into Patanjali, the Yoga Sutras, and you go
Mm-hmm.
to sort of. They have identified 5 thought streams, kind of memory and fancy and knowledge and opinion, and then you can see that we have kind of a witnessing self that can actually sort of okay, this is interesting. This is kind of thought streams, right? And then you sort of activate your neocortex somehow, right? You sort of pick up your crown chakra or your brow chakra, or you have an epiphany or something, right? I mean, the whole thing sort of lights up, right?
Yeah.
We can actually measure these things, right? So this is kind of thanks for that, right? That we can actually measure it. So it's kind of so I don't sort of need to sort of resort to always kind of my shamanism stuff or the woo-woo or the
Sure.
esoteric stuff, right? So anyway, let's assume that the neocortex kicks in, right? Then it wants to associate, right? Oh, a green car, not quite color green as those trees, but 3 nuances, and it goes on and on and on, right? And it kind of to the tune of 1 million of those things per second.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also can witness our conscious selves as a sort of wonderfully tasked and equipped to select 10, 20 bits per second, which we give our conscious attention, which is kind of a little bit of a pilot light in the whole furnace of thoughts. Right? So we select some kind of Ariadne thread amidst sort of the whole sort of muddling through stuff, which we do, right? And thankfully, I also had a distant acquaintance of mine in north of Sweden, and he just looked at me and said, John, and he's a reindeer herder as a day job, right? But his real job is kind of a shaman, right? And he just looked at me and, John, you sure? I mean, that was the thing he said, right? I mean, that's North Sweden for you, right? Kind of, you don't say more words than absolutely necessary. And then I got that. Okay, he means that, right? And then he said yes, right? He could sort of see that. So he sort of switched on my sort of seeing thing, my shine, right, on the spot. Right? So then I saw, I mean, the whole reindeer was there, and they started to shine, which is amazing, right? Because there was no, other than coffee, there was no drugs involved. So it's just a list of, whoa, right? So I saw basically just a little bit more of actual reality. So I guess I then it took me a couple of years to switch that on and off, because in the beginning it was difficult because it's so exhilarating. So you sort of you live in there, right? The zone, right? And it wears the nervous system down eventually. So I mean, some hilarious stories. When you could eat a lot of potato chips, right? If you absolutely had to shut the damn thing off, right? So you just went back to normal. And I don't recommend that because it's kind of not. I mean, that's not good for you, for your body. But if you absolutely have to sort of just shut the damn thing off, potato chips works. I mean, large, indecent amounts of potatoes, also mashed potatoes, also works. Right? Then that makes you fat, right? So that's not good. So anyway, when you're able to switch back and forth, you get enormously much more clued in, but via your own neocortex. There's no kind of there's really very little mysticism involved. I mean, there's some mysticism possibly at the edge of things, right? Because collective intelligence and noosphere and stuff, right? But most of it is just us.
Yeah.
And I mean, someone like Elon Musk, right? He just sort of went, sod it, I'm going to build spaceships, right? And he did. So kind of, he has obviously larger, more easier access to his own luminous path, because you can see, right? He just went ahead. He just put all his savings, a couple of million, and he just sort of almost went broke because he wanted to build a bloody spaceship already, right? So he kind of just did. And then
Well, he calculates risk differently,
yeah,
right?
and the whole Tesla thing, he just went ahead and did it. So
Yeah.
and if you go back in history, possibly we would still living inside caves if it wouldn't been for these crazy people, right? Who just sort of, yeah, let's bash a couple of rocks together. Hey, sparks, we can do fire, we could do boeuf bourguignon, right? I mean, a couple of steps in between, but I mean, it actually went there eventually, right?
So can I dive in there real quick?
Yeah, sure.
So I'm going to touch on risk taking and risk takers. And as you had just said a moment ago, how that is advantageous to a community. So over the last year, one of the things that I had kind of puzzled out for myself, and I don't know if this is validated in scientific research or not, but my hunch on it is this. we, I'll backtrack just a touch before I dive in. Evolution doesn't care about individuals, right? Evolution is really about the substance where all that stuff is written is in the genes, right? So evolution is really not about a battle amongst individuals. It's a battle of genes. And since that's where they get expressed, and then when if you have a baby that has those genes, they end up having blue eyes or blonde hair, or they're fat or they're thin, or they have an extra tooth or whatever. The communities that had kids with genes that made them risk takers, that made them excited to seek the boundaries of their abilities, and made it so that they lost themselves in experiences of learning and challenge. We usually, those people who have brains that work like that, where they lose themselves when they're pushing the edges of their ability, they get rewarded for doing so. Well, shoot, you've just aligned, that group has a huge benefit in that you've aligned the improvement, the incremental improvement of skill sets with getting high off of each attempted improvement, right? We don't like doing things that we've done 1,000 times. We find it boring. We also don't like we don't like taking on tasks that are way beyond our ability level, but we do like taking on tasks that are just ever so slightly beyond what we're capable of.
Yeah.
And that's
the liminal zone in between. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's you talked about the zone, being in the zone and being able to turn that off by eating a bunch of potato chips. And I see that as, another word for the zone is flow and flow states. And for me, I see flow as something that not just humans have. I think you see it in lots of animals as well. You see birds chasing one another. You see puppies wrestling. Well, they're wrestling with their peers, right? They're chasing their peers. For them, that's a fun game. They're losing themselves in that sort of chase or wrestle. But the side effect of it is, after a few months or years of that, they're really good at chasing and they're really good at evading, right? Yeah. They've developed the skill sets. The other piece kind of related to that, and this is sort of more on point with why I brought up the whole evolution cares about genes piece, is my friend Madeline makes a point about how throughout all of human history, young men have basically been hamburger meat. For most of human history, young men were virtually disposable. And they would go off and they would fight the village next door and a bunch of them would die. And that's kind of okay, because you only need one young man to keep the village going. One guy can get a whole bunch of girls pregnant. And so in that context, what you see is if my cousin and I share genes that make us more likely to take risks, especially risks that feel like to us they contribute to the group, the community in some way. I'm going to go and find the new, source of water. I'm going to go discover the new thing. And we go and do take those risks. And I don't come back. I go out searching for the water and I perish during that adventure. And so do 18 of our other cousins. But cousin Freddie went out and he found the water.
Yeah.
And comes back with that. Our community continues. And so what you end up having is that gene, which was shared maybe a few generations earlier, but is common amongst us, that gene gets favored. The gene for risk-taking, basically, gets favored because the math works out, right? Even though there are a bunch of dead ends, it results in a level of risk taking by the individual that's beneficial for the group.
Yeah.
So for the Elon Musks of the world, why is he doing it? Because he feels like it's right.
Yeah.
It feels right to him. He's willing to lose the dollars because he just knows we've got to go to Mars and we've got to, build electric vehicles or whatever, right? And even if he's wrong, right? He is operating from that same operating system that came from this tribal context. For me, this is basically the reasoning behind what I see as our natural tendency towards risk-taking and towards altruism, right? If you look at it from the group, humans are a social species, but that sociality is encoded in the genes.
Yeah.
Right? It's not just something that's handed down. We are built to want to be near others. We are built to want to share and have intimate relationships and want to have sex and make babies and all of these sorts of things. That's not just something that got invented. That's something that was learned. It was, as your friend had said, it was part of a process of learning.
Yeah.
That resulted from those of us who were more social, who were able to live in bigger groups, who were interested in gossip, all that sort of stuff, that ended up fitting, the circumstances that we faced really well because we were able to benefit from, all the group benefits there. And I think I can kind of leave it at that for right now. But the basic gist of it is altruism. From that perspective, altruism is a different form of selfishness. It's a weird way to frame it, right? Because it could be.
But I agree because this is kind of nested. I mean, the whole obviously for some particular circumstances, you could say that context of mutual learning, and you could define context as whatever makes this particular living system thrive in this particular environment. And then it sometimes really do make sense to distinguish that this is mutuality, aka good for the evolution of the tribe, whether incremental or sudden. I mean, someone it's on the brink of sort of perishing the whole village, and then suddenly one of those 18 comes back. I found a new well of the for water, so we're going to make it, everyone. Right? So and everyone celebrates. He's promptly elevated to chieftain or wise person or shaman or high priest or whatnot, kind of. And happily ever after. And then the learning thing is kind of the what makes the math work. So sometimes I try to tell people that what if learning is sort of that residual part of the differential equation? And then suddenly just people just hate me because they can't really follow the logic. And then suddenly some people can sort of just lit up. Whoa, that's a neat way of saying it because this kind of it actually sort of makes sense, right? So because what I'm after is what if we just sort of invented the whole thing, the noosphere. I mean, I've read Taylor Desjardins, right? So there's some really heavy reasoning going on in that book, right? But what if it actually doesn't matter if he just made a, he had one hell of a great trip, right? And he just wrote that book, and it's whoa, good stuff, right? So, and if he would been around, he would possibly even admit that yeah, half of it is just sort of I was in the flow. I was in the zones. I just wrote stuff. Just flew out of my pen, and there it is. Right? Noosphere. It sounded cool then, and it still sounds kind of cool. But it doesn't matter, right? Because it's sort of the unknown, right? So if we go there, and God knows that there's some people perishing, right? There was this guy who went there for 40 days, went back. Let's do unconditional love, right? 2,000 years ago. No, let's nail you to bloody cross, you twat. Right? So I mean, there's some dangers of coming back with a really big story, right?
That's right.
And loads of people are kind of lost in the whole mysticism or Kabbalah or navel gazing or I mean some some people are kind of cool, kind of like Milarepa. He wished you end up in the Malas in the cave, and he just sat there, right? That that to me is cool. No ulterior motives, no strategic outcome, no nothing. I'm just going to sit there. This looks like a nice enough cave. I won't bother anyone. Right? And obviously, kind of to make the story great, someone just came along and, hey, there's a guy, crazy guy sitting in the cave, right? Who's you? I mean, I'm Miller, and then makes for a good story. Else, right? So, but I think this is a key point where some of some of us, I actually can sort of count myself into one of those crazy guys who just goes out on the limb and on the edge, right? We come back with some kind of story. So it's not just solving the immediate problem for the village, but
Yeah.
the whole thing evolves, right? So next time we're moving slightly closer to that well or to that steam engine or to that, and I mean, River Thames, and suddenly there's a whole London growing up and
Yeah.
turns into kind of a megalopolis, right? And this is ongoing. I mean, we are now engaged in a massive social experiment called cities. So it started just a couple of 100 years ago, and in 100 years more, there's going to be like 60 or 70 or 80% of us actually living in cities, and we haven't got the first clue why we're doing that. And I think that's really cool. If we do stuff, and if you ask anyone on this planet, okay, so why cities? Why just living in a really nice cottage away from most of the bastards, right? And most people wouldn't know how to answer that. Well, cities, it's a thing, right? Everyone's doing it, right? So, I mean,
It's interesting
for
because
me,
I'm working on a paper right now, an article that's basically a book review, and one of the things that I was writing about this morning was sort of where modern cities came from, at least
yeah.
in Western Europe, and how that arose. But
I mean, the math actually does work if you really look at it. That you increase creative friction, you increase serendipity, you increase the cultural transmission.
yep.
So there's plenty of actually good, solid reasons. It's just that most people wouldn't know any of that. They just sort of, yeah, I'm going to move to city. Why?
They
Because
just the calculation that they are doing for themselves is there's better job opportunities, there's better entertainment opportunities.
yeah,
My quality of life will be. They're making it from that
yeah,
place.
and
They
this
don't
is
have to.
cool.
They don't necessarily have to know why.
No, I mean, it actually kind of makes better sense if people are thinking that I'm just wanting to sort of game the system for my own individual purposes, and that sort of makes for diversity and resilience. So it's kind of
Yeah.
it, it's it's a really amazing thing if we pull it off. Now, if you go to evolutionary biology, if you go to someone like who studied this kind of how the mollusks and what's the name for it? Protips, anyway,
Prokaryotes. No.
prokaryotes. Yeah, thank you. That's what. And they did kind of first. They started off just swimming around haphazardly in the kind of the mulch, primeval mulch, right? And then you just thought, hey, let's do cities. Oh, I mean, they kind of just they just bashed themselves together and formed sort of more complex organisms. But I mean,
Sure.
and then suddenly some did the sewer stuff, and some did the thinking, and some did the that, and it kind of worked. So my hypothesis, and that's I think why we really should work together and actually make it to the 21st century with sort of nukes and Trump and starvation and inequalities and desertification, whatever interesting challenge we are setting ourselves up to, right? Um, I mean, it's kind of unlived parts of ourselves in a way that I mean, extinction is a definite option, right? It kind of if we want to do that, I mean, then some karmic shenanigans and then we sort of return back and maybe it's the badge's turn. I really don't know. But if we make it to the 21st century, I think some pretty amazing things are going to happen because by then we are sort of the real payback from the investment is going to sort of begin to sort of appear, right? Where suddenly, I mean, I'm old enough to have lived before smartphones altogether. I had a phone which was connected with a cord and sort of to a big telephone station. And
Hmm.
I mean, part of my older skill set was how to listen inside a telephone station and sort of see if anything untoward was going on. Right? I mean, this is completely obsolete right now because there aren't any telephone stations anymore, right? So, and in the future, people will probably be able to tune into the city itself and figure out what they are going to do at that particular moment. So, or even weirder things that aren't possibly even possible to sort of enunciate with English words yet, right? But one of the things I'm tracking right now is how people are using the word ecosystem. It's very, very interesting because on one hand, you have kind of almost a renaissance, which is fun in itself, that word, right? Together with ecosystems. Let's kind of rekindle and revitalize everything again. Let's kind of keep the barrier reef. But on the other hand, there's a kind of an abstraction going on, where ecosystems now can mean
Anything.
installed base smartphones, right? Or
Yeah.
automobiles or something, right? And to me, that's a actually very hopeful sign that we're actually playing with words, playing with social artifacts, playing with language. I talked earlier today about, and we just sort of had this sort of buzzword bingo, right? We just played with words, right? So cognitive augmentation as a service, that might become a thing, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So
It's already becoming a thing.
yeah, and if it does, then that I think is meant to be really, really profoundly fun. And part of it is also going to be exhilarating, bordering on a bit scary. I mean, it's like a roller coaster, right? And it's going to, okay, cognitive. I'm not even thinking all that well. How would I want to augment the crap in my brain as well? I mean, yeah, no, you need to shape up a bit because you don't want to augment all of it, right? Because, well, obvious reasons, right? It's like putting an Uzi in the hands of a toddler, and
Yeah.
you can pretty much figure out what will happen, right? In a crowded space, at least, right? So, but
The way I see that stuff playing out, and I'll just sort of throw it out there. One, pain is a prioritization tool, right? It's really useful for organisms to help them. It's really just, pain is just a negative word for the ability to sense something.
Yeah.
And if you have the ability to sense, then you can steer more effectively.
Yeah, true.
And pain helps you to, maybe I don't want to do that again. And Bill, you might want to not try that either. I had, I'll leave that be. So that's pain. And when it comes to sort of augmented cognitive capacities, well, shoot, for me, what's the role or goal of the scepter stuff? I really, at the end of the day, it's not that I want to increase pain, it's that I want to increase people's ability to sense.
Yeah.
I think that with those types of systems, you actually enable individuals whose brains don't work well enough to be able to sense all of the things happening at the ends of a supply chain or at the edges of a system. It's just too much information for us to process. Well, you can create summaries, right? You can have, and we do this today. One of the simplest examples would be a Yelp or the reviews on eBay, right?
Yeah.
If you think of one of those online rating systems as a process for gathering signals from the real lived experiences of a whole bunch of humans. Well, let's say there's 1,000 humans that rate this restaurant and another 1,000 humans that rate this restaurant. And each of them spent an hour in those restaurants, and they each leave, 1 to 5 stars or whatever the rating system is that's going on there. Well, that's 1,000 hours of lived experience over here and 1,000 hours of lived experience over there. For you to be able to understand the context, the landscape well enough to approximate all of that lived experience, you'd have to spend 2,000 hours.
Yeah.
You know, or at least a couple of hours. But if you let those people leave those little signals and you put them on a piece of paper and you've got 1,000 little, you know, other little ones and threes, that's not all that useful either. Turns out that's still too much. Just the numbers themselves, not the whole hours, but just the numbers, is too much information for me to be able to process and act upon. But if I synthesize it by using, let's say, an average algorithm, right? I add them all up and I divide by the total, and I see that this restaurant 0.7 out of, and this restaurant's a 1.2 out of 5 stars.
Yeah.
Suddenly, I've been able to distill down all of that accumulated wisdom from 2,000 hours of human experience into 1.2, 4.6. I'm going to go with the 4.6.
Yeah.
And so that's, from my perspective, that's our early enable us to augment our sensing capacity so that we can better navigate the context, the circumstances that we are facing.
Yeah.
And the reason I work with Arthur meta-currency think that we should one size fits all ratings thing to pull some subsets and only listen to the things about the attributes I care about. Now it's to go for a vegetarian meal or for a ambiance for me and my sweetheart to go eat at tonight. And even though normally I'm a cheapskate, tonight money's no option, you know, or whatever.
Yeah.
And so for me, that very quickly transitions from being useful for, you know, figuring out to being a different regulatory system. Literally by enabling individuals to, by making it so that individuals are capable of sensing what's going on across a supply chain. You literally give them the capacity, right? If I can see that, oh, if I buy this pair of jeans instead of that pair of jeans, I'm supporting slaves instead of fair trade labor practices. Yeah. Or I'm supporting an organization that's pulling a river and somebody who, you know, I don't know, planting trees or whatever. If I'm able to distinguish between those, because I can sense it, my belief is that when you give people that capacity, give them responsibility. You give them the ability, and the people that they are in community with will expect them to respond in specific ways. Yeah. So you shift the regulatory burden away from we just vote for somebody, a Donald Trump or whoever. You know, they pick the priorities, they pick the values. You actually shift that back to the individual who's sensing two things. If I take this action, consequences be. If I what do my communities?
Yeah.
What will the I buy flour from? Will my customers come into my bakery and still buy bread from me? Or if my customers are not okay with slave-made flour, will they refuse to buy from me? And that ends up positioning the person who's taking the action in a way where they are capable of sensing the repercussions. Yeah. And they're sensitive to, right? They're sensitive because they're because of the information that they're able to rely upon. And that doesn't mean that it all becomes transparent. I want a world where we aren't able to do things and not have somebody else find out about them. But you may have those customers going, hey, where did you get your flour from? You know, we want to know for a variety of reasons.
What I'm sensing here is kind of an amazing opportunity just by doing kind of a two-circle Venn diagram, right? One is basically gossip, which I'm really glad that you sort of brought to bear some kind of put into kind of you've shown a really great light on what it is, right? So we can sort of return to that kind of recording. And the other kind of part that is also kind of overlapping, I think, is the interoperability thing. So if you combine those two, there's some really, really meaningful and valuable patterns in the overlap. Right?
And for me, what that is the interoperability is what enables us to scale our innate regulatory system
Yeah.
to function at the size of our communities as they exist today.
Yeah. Yeah, we get sort of the upgrade of sort of the social technology, sort of keep pace with all the sort of ones and zeros and stuff we've already got. So
that's right. We're already operating at this huge scale. We just don't have the steering mechanisms to manage that.
Yeah.
And I was a student of the Cold War and all of that stuff, and I was convinced by some of those lessons. Hey, distributed decision making tends to do a better job of adapting centralized decision making, and at the same time, if you if somebody comes up with something that proves useful, other people are going to go, well, yeah, let me make use of that too. And so you do get some centralization, but it's a centralization that happens on a voluntary basis as opposed to a imposed basis.
I mean, those are good, right? I mean, those kind of it kind of I tend to see those as sort of clusters, and they can sort of from just that particular context turn into anything in between, kind of a ad hoc rhizome and a strict hierarchy or anything in between. Right? I know I talked with Jon Husband about that as well. It's all a hierarchy concept is interesting because that will allow us to actually consciously, intentionally kind of choose whatever organizing strictness we'd like, right? I mean, if we do that, then we would have a much better job of sort of, it's kind of still very binary. As consultants who are sort of now a bit on the clever side of things, we are, let's put a bit of more of a premium back on resilience and just trust your most, I mean, at least your most brilliant key employees, right? The ones who are actually providing good solid chunk of the core value. I mean, at least that, right? And then you have the managers who kind of for their actually fairly sensible reasons, no, let's kill you dead before you actually manage to implement any which kind of change. So it's kind of so it's kind of an autoimmune reaction which you sort of need to understand as well, because they are ones tasked to do just that, right? Hey, sort of foreign antibody named consultant. Oh, let's go to him and sort of disarm him, right? And then kill him, right? First, oh, actually, if you're intelligent, first suck out all the gooey goodness, insight, and stuff that consultant can. Yeah, then disarm him and kill him. So that was the proper response. Right? Kind of, I'm relying heavily on one of those kind of T-cell kind of images, right? Kind of. But, and I did 2 spectacular failed startups in London, so I've sort of been part of some very interesting kind of autoimmune reactions in England. So it's kind of so this is not just hypothesis, right? For most seasoned consultants that have lived through, survived some of those ordeals. But I mean, the the finer point here is that, which I think this whole conversation has been absolutely brilliant, is because we have sort of begin to indirectly, which probably is the only working way to address this. I mean, if we would say just let's do an hangout and we will sort of sort evolution, right? And we're done, right? A couple of hours later, you're just done. You could just go watch the hangout already and just see what we told you, right? So, but indirectly, so allows others to sort of weigh in from any which kind of other direction. See that if you do interoperability gossip and take a good enough provisional ontology, good enough patterns, implement them.
Yeah, you bootstrap it a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah. And then does that provide for slightly better interoperability functions? Because I mean, the functions is the thing for most people. I mean, will this get?
Yeah, at the end of the day, this stuff gets adopted because people use it and they outcompete others, right? group, their company, their community, whatever, thrives in a way that others simply can't keep pace with, and that's going to be what drives adoption of these systems.
I mean, that's how I marketed. Whenever people messaged me privately and said, "John, why should I bloody care about the conversation community in Google Plus?" I mean, Google Plus is something that it was kind of iffy right from the start, and then adding further strangeness to that, right? And then I just told them very simply that outside the conversation community, 1%. Inside the conversation community, 3%. That allowed everyone I really wanted to keep to stay because they could figure out the rest for themselves. I mean, do the math, right? This is don't care about me being brilliant or me doing biosemiotics. Well, the hell with all that, right? 1%, 3%, right? So this, and I've sort of refined that further, right? So the conversation community is in its instance now, it's actually not a community anymore, it's a way station. So it kind of, I'm all for anyone doing pretty much anything there as long as there's some kind of discernible progress, next steps forward, which then can be repackaged, redistributed, shared. So it evolves, right? So, but this is also very tricky. I mean, I want to commit to recording, right? Which I think is a key thing. If anyone would ever sort of see this, right? So this bears repeating. Seek the boundaries of our abilities. Almost kind of an injunction, almost a principle, right? So, and how do we know that my hypothesis is that the universe is engaged in a pronoid conspiracy. I mean, the opposite to the paranoid conspiracy. The universe really wants the best for us. It's just that we are putting up really a good fight, right? Because consciously we can process 10 bits per second, which is kind of deaf, mute, and blind, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So what should the universe do? Well, it sort of hits us with dreams, or with other people, or with relationships, or with dynamics, or wicked problems, or challenges, and the whole ecosystem is going kaput, or well, stuff, right? So, and the universe is very wise in doing so because eventually, sort of, our conscious just sort of surrenders to the flow, right? Somehow. I mean, we could do that in many, many, many different ways. I mean, art is one, science is another, philosophy is a third. There's lots and lots of ways, right? But if we do seek the boundaries of our abilities, the universe rewards us with flow. And I have never, ever not been rewarded by a flow when I do that. So for me, it's very simple. You just call it nature. I mean, others might not sort of just make that strong connection I just did, but for me, that's it, right? And obviously, me being me, I'm very curious, right? Bordering on stupid. Can I overstep the boundary? How far, right? Until things really get iffy, right? And the universe even says, John, no, there's a cliff there. Stop some couple of inches before that, right? I mean, but what if I can actually fly? And I learned that way down. I mean, I'm really weird that way, right? And I mean, I did the chakra thing, right? I just thought, well, sod it. This seems to be kind of innate knowledge to experience full illumination. Well, I'm just going all in on that, right? So I did, and I just had one really amazing experience, which involved me floating around half semi-conscious in a swimming pool, guided by others performing healing. And then it got really weird after that, so I won't tell that part of the story. But anyway, that was one of those really amazing things, out of body and the whole kit and caboodle, right? So, and if you're still alive after the expedition, right, it's all worth it, right? So, and this is where there's a nice American word here, gnarly individualism, and I love that particular quality in sort of Californian people. I mean, there's some in New York as well, right? So I have that, and we don't have that as much in Sweden. But I'm from the north of Sweden, and we have that in spades in the north of Sweden. Where
what was the term?
Gnarly individualism.
Oh, okay. I'm a surfer. We would pronounce it gnarly.
Gnarly, yeah, gnarly, yeah.
Gnarly individualism. All right.
Yeah, and we just kind of sold it. Why not, right? I mean, this is me, right? If you don't like it, well, just go away. And the thing is, and this can't be proved, right? That, and obviously to your point with the math, this is kind of a sobering part of all those 18 that didn't make it back with the stories, right? So it kind of, and universe kind of is not too much preoccupied with all those who didn't make it, because I mean everyone dies, right? It's kind of so from the universe point of view, from the cosmic time scale, what's the worry, right? There's plenty of your sort where you came from, and but once you discover that, even as a hypothesis, that if you do your thing, with just one proviso, share the story somehow, right? By example, by putting it in a book, by putting it in a song, anything, right? So at least indirectly it sort of can benefit the others, right? Then
Yeah.
the rest is a bonus points, right? To be enjoyed, basically. It's a ride. I mean, I really love when you said that you went out surfing. Right? I mean, I did that mostly by playing the violin, because I grew up like that, and I learned to play the violin at a young age, right? And then you could just sort of, I mean, it demands that you're just fully there. Nothing exists other than you playing violin, and sort of that's sort of thing, right? And I mean, I was at a sort of stage where I did, I think, 8 hours of practice every day, right, on top of school, which was kind of grueling, right? But it was also wonderful because you had to go all in, because you were at sort of level of expertise that you couldn't improve unless you did that, right? So that has helped me enormously, because when I do anything, research, social media, whatnot, that's what I do. I just, why not? Why do it half-hearted? There's no bloody point of doing that, right? Someone else will beat you to it if you do that, and it will be boring. Why do that? So it's kind of, but there's a possibly I will not get to it. I will need to percolate for a couple of days. But the interoperability and gossip thing is very interesting trajectories if you do it again and again and again and again, right? So it
There's
might actually
yeah.
enable us to I mean, again, to your point of sort of, is the point to all this, can you actually hack the whole thing? Can you move beyond 150 Dunbar? Well, might be, right? If you go full in on those, and then constantly sort of not worrying too much on having the perfect framework around it, right? Because we will possibly never get to that. But
Yep.
if you do that again and again and again, and then learn from, because there will be sort of boundaries. I mean, just by going from interoperability version 1 to version 2 is kind of a big project all by itself, right? And then the gossip thing, I mean, imagine if this goes really well. Suddenly there's 100 million people who want to have this little widget or app or platform or whatever it is, right? Then what, right? And then loads of those people will then be informed enough to sort of just say, this is too good to be true, or this is works too well, or this doesn't work, or how about religion? And well, yeah, you know, right? You kind of, and all the bankers who sort of goes, sort of, are we going to be disrupted? Yes, and about
Yes.
time as well, right? So,
Yeah.
um,
There's well, there's a few things that I'd love to point to if you or anybody who watches this later on is interested in following up. One, I wrote a blog post a little while ago called The Collaborative Vision, CLLBRTV vision, and it was basically me going, all right, it's time for me to start a political movement, basically. Not in a we want to win elections sort of way, but in a there's this whole different way that we could regulate ourselves sort of way, and it's time to bring other people into that discussion, really. And I map out some of how this stuff functions and why, how it's, what the philosophical underpinnings are, at least as far as I see them. That's the first one. The second, I did an interview a few months ago that just came out last week. I got interviewed by Kevin Kelly and Mark Frohenfelder. Kevin is the founder of Wired magazine, and Mark is the founder of Boing Boing. And they have a little podcast called Cool Tools. And they interview somebody every month or so on that person's 4 favorite tools, or 4 tools that would be useful for their audience. And me being who I am, I brought a tool from each area of my life. I'm a big wave surfer, I'm a political philosopher, I'm a privacy advocate, and I'm an innovation consultant. And so I brought one tool from each of those areas. And there's the second tool, which I dove into, and I did a decent job. I didn't do a world-class job, but I tried to articulate coherence layers, which you have an awareness of, just in some of the things that you've said and the ways that you've framed it, in particular the interoperability version 1 and then interoperability version 2, and things building on top of one another. You have an understanding of how a thing will arrive on the scene, and then that becomes food for the next piece that gets built on top of that, and then suddenly you have a new landscape, and then that becomes food for the next, et cetera, et cetera. So I try to map out a number of those things all within a 30-minute conversation. That's a pretty useful thing. I haven't even posted that anywhere. I haven't put it on my blog or shared it on Facebook, but that's on the to-do list. And then the last one is is related to this, and it has to do with I gave a talk a year and a half ago in Texas on how to balance privacy and transparency in a digitally connected world. And it's just a little 15-minute talk, but I dive in pretty deeply into this stuff, and that introduces a couple of tensions that fit together in important ways if you're trying to understand how this whole gossip and interoperable signals, how all of that stuff is really should play out, I guess would be the way to frame it. Not necessarily will play out, but how it should play out. And I think will play out over the long term. And then the last piece I'll just say has to do with utility versus morality. And without going super into the weeds on that, evolution favors stuff that works, that's useful, right?
Yeah.
And so we take the shape that we take because this shape was useful. That doesn't mean it was right.
True.
And one of my main example for that is rape. Rape has proved really useful. Almost none of us are here without some history of rape in our ancestral lineage.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it was right.
Yeah.
And when we look at, evolving towards the next thing, next whatever, we don't come at that from a, I'll frame it, instead of framing it in the negative, I'll frame it in the positive. We have a perspective. We come at that problem, we come at that issue from a perspective, and that perspective is as humans, right? So there are some who advocate for, the merging of humans and artificial intelligence, and maybe us eventually being supplanted by artificial intelligence. And I go, well, that could be a possibility. Like that very well might be a more efficient system, but it's not a better system from my perspective, right? Like, I've got a dog in this fight. I want this world to work well for other species too, but I definitely also want it to work well for humans. And I do think that Elon Musk and some of the other folks that have warnings around artificial intelligence are right in that regard, in that, hey, this isn't something where we should just let this run its course and become whatever is the most efficient will win. No, not at all. Like, this is something that we're creating, and there may one I came up with a framing for this a little while ago, and I'm gonna try to remember it. There are advocates within the artificial intelligence, the pro artificial intelligence world. I'll frame it that way. Folks who are, let's say the singularity, Ray Kurzweil, all that, who look at the emergence of a post-human, digital civilization, let's say, as if it's, they're cheerleading for it. Yeah. And to me, that feels like sheep who are looking at the wolf who's about to eat them and go, oh man, we're going to become wolves.
Yeah, yeah.
No, your flesh is going to fuel, that wolf. That's different. And I do think that there are ways in which artificial intelligence can really improve efficiency. But no amount of efficiency improvement is worth a loss of humanity, a loss of your ability to steer through life. And some of the things that make us, that are core to our experience of living a life that feels human, is that ability to exercise agency, that ability to exercise.
If you look at it, kind of what sort of spawned the whole artificial intelligence, that was kind of arguably on this planet, us, right? And we arrived at that through a very, very lossy process, called civilization and evolution. And so kind of arguably there could have been 1,000 Ray Kurzweil files that just sort of never did make it because they sort of was born in the dark ages and stuff, right? Stephen Hawking is one of my favorite examples because he just sort of got lucky, right? He kind of just, we managed just to help him to just sort of more or less function. He's kind of, at least his brain, right? Most of the rest of his body is just basically not working, right? So he's kind of living proof that we are kind of in a realm where there's many, many different options. We could use Stephen Hawking's example. Well, let's just sort of keep his brain. That's the only valuable part. The rest is just rubbish, right? And it's garbage, right? It's kind of get rid of that. But
not for him, it's not.
No, it's not, right? He would sort of be the first to say, well, he can't actually do it with the hand, right? But he would sort of
But he still likes it, probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
He's fond of holding on to it.
Yeah, yeah. So, and some people are, and it's kind of one of the most profound questions. We probably will need to battle this for the rest of this century, I think, that should we make both an ethical and an aesthetical weighing of whether we want to go sort of whole hog algorithm, singularity, or whatnot, or not, right? This might be merit even from a efficiency long-term standpoint, if we do keep the option of having some lossy processes around.
Absolutely. And I mentioned earlier that the pattern that wins in nature has a tension between efficiency and resilience. It has a tension between centralization and diversity. The argument that I end up making in that privacy versus balance speak that, right? And newness being dependent on diversity and upon privacy, on being able to have safe spaces within which you can take small risks, within which you can try new things. You had mentioned earlier, consultants trying to convince business leaders to empower their people, at least their, best and brightest people or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And for me, I have a pretty simple formula there. I kind of apply it everywhere I go, especially with my clients, and that is, if you can constrain the size of risk taking, if you can constrain the risk that will happen when somebody tries something new, that empowers you to enable people to try new things. Not just yourself, but others as well. And that means you can enable the people within your organization to try new stuff. But you're only going to be able to do that if you can constrain, the downside risk of them trying new stuff.
Yeah.
And it ends up being this iterative process where you let them make suggestions, and then if there's a bunch of sort of support for one of those suggestions, okay, maybe you put a small budget, a tiny test of that,
Yeah.
and this kind of repeats over and over and over again, and you're able to get the innovation and resilience stuff without dying in the process, without losing all of the efficiency benefits that may be necessary for the organization's or organism's survival. And the other piece kind of related to that, and this touches on coherence layers, which I haven't really gotten into I haven't really dove into here, but you can listen to that podcast. And pain at one I'll give an example of a coherence layer. My body, me, I'm a coherence layer, right? I eat food. I transform that food into various things. Some of the food becomes energy for me. Some becomes muscles, and some becomes blood, and et cetera. And some becomes poop or sweat or whatever, right? So there's all these outputs that come from that. So I'm a coherence layer. And by that, I mean, I am sort of separate from the world around me, but I'm also connected to it. And I transform resources as they flow through me. I'm a coherence layer. I'm part of a group, let's say the metacurrency group. That's another coherence layer. It's a way of organizing the individual parts, right? So no matter what you look at in the world, whether it's a single cell or an organism or a company or a community, etc., no matter what you look at, you're always looking at something that, depending on your perspective, is an individual, is a collection of individual parts, or is an ecosystem, which I'll frame just as a collection of collections of individual parts, right? And that's sort of a fractal pattern that goes not just up and down in sort of a physical way, but in n number of different dimensions, because there are conceptual coherence layers as well. You could say, all of the white things on the table, and suddenly you've ordered someone's thought in a different way. And when you look at this stuff from that perspective, all the stuff I talked about earlier with averaging, reviews of restaurants, well, that average, that was a synthesis. You had fed some resources into a coherence layer, into that algorithm, and it spit out a new result that synthesized, that provided information that was more densely packed. It lost, you mentioned being lossy earlier, kind of using it in a different way, but it lost a lot of the details, right? But that's okay. I didn't want all those details. I may be able to go inspect them separately. It provides them in a nutrient-rich form, right? In a dense form.
I mean, I have a great example of that, sort of the value of even small adjustments of the scale. I mean, in IMDb, the kind of movie database, right? There's from 0 to 10, I think. I mean, most movies are not 10s, right? And 8 is a really great movie. So this is just an understanding that everyone sort of agrees on, that because it's sort of, that's how it is, movies, right? But then you can actually delve into, and for me, if I want to watch drama, it's invaluable for me to go to IMDb, because I know drama, anything above 6.7, I'm going to enjoy. That's a really great information, right? And who arrived at that? Well, I don't need to care about that, because it just sort of sums up. It's kind of a really great number. And I tested it, right? If I'm feeling really lenient, right, towards the movie director and the movie, and then 6.2, but it's kind of, oh no, it's I can see a bit too many plot holes and all that, right? So but then it's contextual. So now we're talking sci-fi, right, which I love. and I think I can enjoy almost down to 5.2, right? Because one of those kind of,
I'm just amused by the specificity of the ratings.
yeah, I've tested, right? I mean, I'm weird that way. I love math. I love these kind of kind of 5.1. No, that's kind of wrong side of that magical border kind of thing, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I've seen a lot of science fiction, so I kind of sort of, yeah. I mean, obviously, if there's a new movie coming out and it has high numbers, then I'm prioritizing. So it's obviously, it matters, right, where on the scale it is. But if if I really am sort of a sucker for a new movie and there's no movie around, and then yeah, I can possibly stretch towards
Yeah.
the lower numbers. And yeah, it's still, well, it's a bit of a half crappy movie, but who cares, right? There's what
So
comedy and science fiction, right?
I'll dive back into the point that I was initially wanting to get to, and I went down that last trajectory, and that was pain across coherence layers. So we had talked earlier about pain and the ability to sense. Even when pain is fatal, and this is actually one of the points I make in the Kevin Kelly and Mark Frohnfeller podcast. Even when pain is fatal for an individual, it can be instructive for the surrounding coherence layer, for the group, let's say.
Yeah.
And you had mentioned this, you had touched on this earlier when you said, well, at least share, right? Yes, you can go have this experience, but share.
Yeah, yeah.
Create the story, etc. And my favorite example, and I also mentioned this there, my favorite example is from The Simpsons, and it is of it's from the episode where they have kind of a Lord of the Flies episode, and there's a character named Ralph Wiggums, and Ralph is kind of like the nerdy kid, and Ralph eats some purple berries, and he's got this purple stain around his mouth, and he says, "I ate the purple berries," and then he falls onto the ground, and the other kids gather around him and goes, "How do they taste, Ralph?" And he goes, "They taste like burning. Oh, oh." and and for Ralph, that could have proved fatal for Ralph,
Yeah.
right? And the other kids wouldn't have eaten the purple berries. And so when you talked earlier about learning, right, that pain and even the death of different practices is a form of that learning. It's a curation side. You've got sort of these two spheres, right? We talked about efficiency and resilience. Well, if you want to frame those in different terms, how do you get efficiency? Curation. You get rid of the stuff that's not best.
Yeah.
And what is resilience about? It's about generation. So you have generation and curation, and those two things being in tension with one another always.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you can't fully get both, at least not at the same time, right? So, I mean, what I see as, I mean, I have kind of a provisional concept, if you will, right? I mean, I'm calling it sort of autopoietic shift, actually kind of a capability to steward autopoietic shift, kind of the longer thing, right? So, but to get to that, we need to become increasingly happy with both um, resilience and efficiency. Efficiency when that is the best approach. I mean, if I want to be efficient in terms of reach, if I want to do a blog post, and if I just do it on my little Tumblr thing on the side, no one will ever read it. If I'm doing it on Facebook, chances are some people will read it, right? So that's a more efficient approach. I'm just going to do that. But I mean, then I do this, right? I mean, not sure if you can actually see that kind of
Yep.
pen and paper, right? Which is kind of just preposterous. Who on earth is doing pen and paper in this day and age? Well, I am, right? Because, I mean, actually, Paul Saffo supports me here, right? Kind of Institute for the Future. He says paper is brain interface. I just happen to have been brought up with a pen and paper and just jot down stuff, right? Preferably
Yeah.
early in the morning, right after morning coffees, and just write down stuff. So, and when I do that, that forms a very interesting creative tension in between, because this stays, right? I mean, I make sure that I have good pens that sort of just, it just works and it stays on the paper, right? Exactly where I put it. So, and I mean, Facebook is ephemeral, right?
Yeah.
It's just different. Uh, so I can suddenly get sort of best of both worlds. So I can return to my sort of slower, meandering, cumulative, carefully sort of collection. I mean, I love that phrase, right? Collection of collection. I mean, that's kind of what this is, right? And but now and then, I can sort of see a glitch in my own thoughts, right? I mean, I do these sort of tables and lists and systems and stuff, right? And I see, what's that, right? And I actually don't know. I know that there should be something there, right? It's kind of the missing unobtainium part in the periodic table. So I just throw that in. And that's where,
Unobtainium.
and someone, I actually stole that from Jerry Mikulski, by the way.
Yeah, yeah. I love Jerry.
So, and then someone answers, right? And say, yeah, that's one of those, right? So, and that's, uh, if we begin to, um, what's the word that, I mean, Bateson calls it in a very neatly way, kind of the mind and nature a necessary unity. It's just such a neat thing, and it's really troublesome to actually explain. Even him has trouble explaining that, right? And then uh, Feynman has a very different approach to describing it. He says nature uses only the longest threads, where you can start anywhere and just tease out one of the threads, and it turns out it's connected with everything else. So I love Bateson for his neatness, and then I have the world of trouble with sort of translating that into sort of a digestible language, you could say.
Mm-hmm.
And then I love Feynman for his uh, seemingly completely nonlinear quantum physics, Richard Feynman kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
And then it turns out some of his ways of framing it is makes for much more palatable, much more meaningful, much more generative metaphors. So
Mm-hmm.
then, um, I mean, when you said all these things, it's always a dangerous thing to sort of feed me creative tensions, because my mind sort of, whoa, differential equation. I'm just going to sort of commit that to my mind and see it, and then it sort of starts to spin, right? So when you describe coherence layer, it's just sort of, whoa, neat uh, way of describing things, right? I mean, I'm really honest about that. I mean, this is
Yeah.
not just me being kind of cute and all right. I mean, I really love having uh, different ways of conceptualizing things, because I think that is an essential part of not only discourse but culture and civilization. So the more we can share that, and the more we can, um, I guess I'm describing kind of small groups as well here, in a sense, kind of small, really brilliant groups which can play with these things. So uh, individually, we almost have to employ sort of a conceptual shorthand and say, I'm an explorer, I'm an inventor, I'm a crazy person, I'm weird, I'm this, I'm,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, something, right? But small groups can then uh, play with these conceptualizations. I mean, when you said kind of political philosophy, right? Political philosophy is kind of a, as I see it, a small group, small coherent group, sort of tag team kind of sport, right? Where, uh, and I met all kinds of people. Some of my relatives tried sort of go it alone in terms of politics, and they end up kind of a bit on the goofy side, or a bit on the controlling side, or on a bit of a kind of authoritarian side. Or I mean, there's loads and loads of dangers. But small groups tend to fare better.
Yeah.
You even have it in corporations. I mean, Hewlett and Packard, right?
Mm-hmm.
Two guys, right? Not one, right?
And it's
Uh,
often three. Yeah.
Jobs, Wozniak. Gates and that other guy, crazy guy.
Yeah.
So, and again and again and again, not only two and sometimes three and four.
Well, and Jobs and Wozniak had a third partner early on,
Yeah, and
initially.
and also there was another thing I wanted to commit and re-emphasize. Right, the a small group can then stay with the thing for a while, and until it begins to sort of show itself how it plays out. I mean, it's hard when you said how it should play out, and then my mind just went, how it should play out, yeah, how it could play out, and then you just sort of take those two sentences together and see how they sort of play tag team with each other, right? So
Mm-hmm.
obviously you need a bit of a should, right?
Mm-hmm.
If someone is a complete bastard inside the conversation community, that doesn't play out, so I throw them out, right? And I mean,
Yeah.
I'm happy to report that there's 8 people blocked out of 2,300. So it kind of,
So the numbers are okay there.
I'm okay with those numbers. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not happy with throwing people out, but I'm okay with the numbers. Right?
But you'll defend the community if need be. You
Yeah.
are managing that coherence layer.
Yes,
And
exactly.
and this actually touches on a point that I'd meant to make earlier, which is that the hard part about balancing efficiency and resilience is that that balance gets struck across many coherence layers, and they don't all move in the same direction, right?
Yeah.
So you end up you end up taking an action to sort of make yourself stronger in this way, and often that ends up sort of collapsing your surrounding environment. That's sort of what's happened with humans right now, right? Like, we've designed all these institutions that were really great, that have helped us to be so much more efficient in our extraction of resources from our surrounding environment. And the efficiency gain that we have been blessed with is collapsing the resilience of the environment that we operate within.
Yeah.
Right. But the big piece for me, and I kind of already mentioned this with that pain piece a minute ago, is you can also flip that, right? So instead of us becoming stronger and accidentally imposing weakness or collapse on a surrounding system, you can actually do the opposite. And it's that same trick that I mentioned earlier that I use in my consulting work as well as elsewhere. And that is, if you can enable your people to endure tiny pains, right?
Yeah.
If you embrace these tiny pains, you can gain strength. You can literally generate awareness and do curation at larger coherence layers. So
Yeah.
instead of having harmony at one coherence layer resulting in discord at an adjacent layer, you can introduce discord at one coherence layer and have that result in harmony at a larger layer. Meaning, literally, hey, I'm trying lots of these little things. They're tiny tests, so they're not going to hurt me very much, but they are painful, right?
Yeah.
They're little tiny pains. But if we do enough of those little tiny pains, we get to learn what's going to work, and then we can actually implement that. And that's a fancy way of describing the scientific method, basically.
No, that's a great way of describing it. I've actually did once in a session, a workshop with people, and I had them walk across the floor, which they were obviously mastering, because at first they just needed to walk back and forth from one wall to another wall and sort of back and forth. Right? So I just wanted to make sure that I want you to be 100% sure that this is something you can do, right? So, and they knew that I was kind of on to some funky things, right? So they did.
They're willing to go along with it.
Yeah. So okay. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I wanted them to feel it. They could feel it in their bodies that I'm now enjoying sort of the experience of walking, and I'm really good at it for some strange reason, right? And then I told them that if you really, really become present with your body, you will realize that it's impossible for you to actually walk back and forth. And so they still had to do that, whilst me telling them that your trailing foot has to actually let go of that sure footing in a way that sort of propels a good enough flowing landing of your forward foot. And then they sort of went and described to minute detail and more and more and more. And then suddenly they felt that, whoa, this is bordering on the impossible. You could actually see them walking, and it became sort of stultified and awkward, and then some of them sort of almost fell over and got bad balance because suddenly they were and like involving too much of their conscious mind, and the conscious mind is kind of just crap at even at walking, right? So that was a new
Totally.
thing for most of them, right? But then I
Yeah.
started on even more and described it. If you actually look at, if you would be able to sort of pinpoint your actual physical center point and center of gravity, which might be two different points, and then you do a complex response of sort of undulating around those two, and you use that as to drive the momentum. So you have a particular gait, a way of walking, and then suddenly I got them to actually get back to actually being able to walk again. But now they were enriched by understanding that such a seemingly simple task involves taking one foot forward, right? I mean, a leap into the unknown, right? Metaphorically. And then you can't do that if you're not at some point later on willing to sort of let go. And then you do a swinging thing with that trailing foot, and then that's the next step. And then you need to shift the whole thing, how you sort of position yourself with a foot that used to be the forward, the one that's kind of so. And then I uh, use some things I basically just picked up from choreography 101, right? This is not just all that difficult, really. I just sort of took it way further and analyzed into kind of main meaning. And then I usually ended up applying it to this is how you can feel as almost as if for the first time consciously, if you're doing kind of a strategy, which is exactly this, right? You sort of take a couple of steps until you reach whatever goal, objective, strategic outcome you have. You should go through all these three steps. First, you just do it. That works, kind of, right? It's just that that doesn't work at all if the circumstances change. Because now we're still using just this very simple place, which is called the floor, which is completely flat. So you can walk very easily, right? Because there's no obstacles, right? There's no climbing, there's no gradients, right? The floor just doesn't start to
Now
wobble.
turn off the lights and put some
Yeah.
holes.
I
Yeah.
mean, in one advanced session, I put down. Have you seen those? I love those books. I mean, they are of limited use, but I love them because in them you can find steps. So you could do the cha-cha or the waltz, or and
Mm,
there's just
yeah.
kind of
So you put down those little footstep things. Okay.
so I put them down on the floor, and then they just had to walk like that, right? And that
Yeah.
always was hilarious because suddenly someone saw someone who hadn't sort of taken the down step in their life, and suddenly they were doing the cha-cha, right?
Yeah.
By just following that, right? So
Yeah.
I mean, and they could feel that that felt different in the body because now they were dancing. Right? So, and then I told them that this is a bit more of a flowing thing. So if you can add just a little smidgen of that into your strategy, you as a leader or as a kind of innovator, as a pathfinder or strategist or whatever you are, if you have some of that, the others will sense that, right? Suddenly there's less of a drudgery, there's less of the boring stuff, and it, it's going to feel. I mean, you can't sort of promise them you will dance through life. That's sort of overstating it, but I mean, it awoke so much good stuff in them, right? So, and obviously, it's helped that I can actually play Swedish folk music on the violin, on the fiddle, right? So that I can
Sure.
just do fun stuff on the side, right? Uh, I mean, a waltz. I mean, it's kind of seemingly a simple thing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and then it's if you really look into it, it's really really complicated, right? So even a march is difficult, right? If you kind of want everyone to just march in unison, right? And then a tight outfit like Rolling Stones or the Beatles or anyone,
Something fun.
they did like hours and hours and years until they got really tight in playing together,
Yeah.
and you can hear that. So
Yeah.
there's no end in sight of, and all of that is basically my mind going overdrive when all those sort of uh, so instead of what many have advocated previously, that efficiency is the thing, no, resilience is the thing, right? Kind of no, that the creative tension in between is the thing, right? Because
Yeah.
that is the movement, right? That's just, I mean, there's a favorite quote of mine, um, Alfred Adler. I mean, I don't like Alfred Adler that much because it's kind of self-assertion psychology and psychotherapy, and kind of that turned really kind of weird afterwards, and all those kind of I'm very angry with my father and all that. It devolved. I mean, it turned weird, right? I mean, I'm more of a Jungian in that way, right? Kind of dreams. Anyway, but Odd has a quote: uh, "Trust movement," and that alone is worth the price of admission for me. I mean, it's one of those kind of, because he's going to spend 30 years of sort of getting to that. And the kind of that was his sort of key in terms of what did he do to figure out if he actually helped people. Well, he did that, right? He instilled that sense in them. So,
Hmm.
and obviously it helped that they were invariably stuck, and they knew that they were stuck. So that's
Yeah.
why they went to therapy. So,
Yeah. They were looking for
um,
movement.
yeah, so they were looking for movement, but he then sort of connected it, right? So you could trust. I mean, you could actually trust the stuckness to tell you that you thought that you were going that way, but a deeper wisdom is this way instead, right? So they kind of, and resolving that is dancing, right? I mean, I won't go into too much detail about dancing, but as you actually engage the room, the positive and the negative space in the room in a certain way, and then it all comes alive. So I mean, a really skilled dancer can sort of make a whole room come alive just by how he or she moves. Now, this can be transferred into, I mean, again, I mean, I'm not halfway there myself, right? Because I'm still kind of taking it personally when people doing cat gifts. I really should sort of level up that part of the game, right? But if I'm honest with myself, I kind of still think that's a waste, right? Of human
Hmm.
potential.
Hmm.
So that part of the collective dance, I'm a bit unhappy with. Right? So then, if I have that limits my options, and then I have to sort of do a counter dance to that, right? And they sort of have to educate the plebs or whatever else I'm doing, and the conversation keeps going. So it's kind of, and then people resist me because that's kind of, I start off with sort of the wrong foot in a way, right? But
Sure. Sure.
if I accept that that's me, that still works because eventually that resolves into something, and I don't really need to perfectly understand what that is. So,
Yeah.
um, no, I mean, just to kind of to tell you that I really appreciated all those sort of polarities and tensions because I think they are essential. And obviously, the both the regulation of cybernetics and I think Bateson is a good word for it. Buck means full of the trim tab, right? The
Hmm.
regulation on the regulation, right? The first is the rudder, and there's the trim tab on the rudder, so to
Yep.
have the rudder
Yep.
work better, right? More efficient. So
Yep.
there's lots more, but that will have to percolate for a bit, right? And there's a,
Yeah.
but I would love to return more and in some other format in terms of, because you said something else that was
Yeah.
long
I'll say this. So
most
my
effective
only
organizing
regret.
patterns. Sorry to
Yeah.
interrupt. But most
Yeah.
effective organizing patterns. That was one of those things that I just had to jot down as well. What you said,
Hmm.
because that is, if someone would say, okay, is there a takeaway here that can begin to apply immediately? Yes, there is. You can look at your own intersection of interoperability and gossip, or rather your lack of acceptance of gossip and your lack of interoperability in your sense making schemas or whatnot you're using, and look no further than the intersection for slightly different, possibly better organizing patterns. So that is kind of I'm kind of keen on doing that because I know that I'm rambling and waffling on, right? So sometimes I just better myself. Well, that, right? And then forget about all the other things we said. Just do that, and then you're good, right? So um, that's kind of from my journalism background, right? I mean, the editor in me that says, John, what's the 2 words curation? What's the 1 sentence curation? What's the there's no room in the magazine. You need to shorten. Here it. Whether that's useful or not, I think it can be useful, right? Because time is still of the essence, I think. I mean, I talked with some really clever people about this. We seem to converge on somewhere around either 10 or 20 years of a window of opportunity where we can actually sort of
Yeah.
make a difference for ecosystems and for human societies and autopoiesis and all that. So it's not an exact science, but my intuition
But
tells me that
there's not unlimited time that we've got to
no,
do
we
this
don't have
work.
100 years, right? You sort of
Yeah.
rat it out. We should get our act together
Yeah.
now already, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do need to run, and I do want to just say thank you. This was a really fun conversation. I will say I'm very grateful for the summary there at the end. My one regret from these kinds of conversations is that they seem to take 2 or 3 hours. We're coming up on 3 hours, and though that's wonderful for us, that I think that's a form that almost nobody else will be willing to listen through, at least not immediately. And so the one desire that I wish for is, yes, I know there's a bunch of small pieces that I was able to drop throughout this conversation that we were able to unearth together throughout this conversation. And my wish is in the near future to be able to package each of those little small pieces into something that's digestible for other people without huge amounts of investment on their part, right? Without having to go, well, I'm going to take 3 hours and listening to,
Yeah, well, that's impossible. I mean,
Yeah.
and also I wanted to just let it roll because it was an absolute delight talking with you, and there's some stuff here that actually might be not wanted to sort of be self-aggrandizing or in any which way, but I really do think there's some stuff in here that is good, and I can promise you this: if you want to, in some foreseeable future, you and I could actually get together and do the 18-minute conversation.
Would
Just
love to.
because, I mean, you and I are fairly clever, right? So we could just have that as sort of a kind of a stretch goal, right? And see, could we actually sort of just commit and just pull that off? Because that, obviously, we could sort of, you could distill 18 good enough minutes out of this, right? But it
Yeah,
will take you kind of a small forever to do that.
that's
I mean,
right.
I mean,
Well,
needless to
and to be
say,
honest, to be totally honest, I'm okay with not doing it all in 18 minutes. I'm totally fine with doing 40 different 18-minute pieces because I think people have no problems listening to that. But
yeah,
1 2.5 hour piece, you'll get almost nobody listening to,
yeah,
or
exactly.
starting to engage in.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I'm actually also talking with other people about um, what's the right word for it? The transition uh, seminars
Mm.
as kind of a catch-all for, and then there, if those happen, it'll be kind of like 3 or 4 of us on stage,
Mm-hmm.
videotaped, some impressive backdrop up on the stage where we put lots of fancy things, kind of roadmap, and then an audience and
Sure.
breakout sessions. No, I mean,
Yeah.
honestly, because if we do that,
Mm-hmm.
it will put an enormous amount of pressure on those poor 3 or 4 people
Yep.
sitting there and being really clever because it's everything videotaped. The audiences
Yep.
are there to sort of uh, project sort of good vibes, collective intelligence on us because we want to do our very best because they're actually bothering to go there and obviously all
Yeah.
of this is packaged in a way so it will actually be a sensible business model. This can sort of be a videotape
Yeah.
package, further distributed and syndicated and whatnot, right? But my
Not,
idea
and I'll be honest, that's not too different a vision that from what I'm hoping to do with collaborative. So if you do go read that blog post on my blog about the
yeah,
collaborative vision, it's pretty close to that, except, well, you had mentioned wanting that part of it to be participatory, and that's a huge part for me. Like, yes, I do want to bring in some thought leaders and have us have some discussion, but I really want it to be an interactive thing that is then generative and builds on itself each time we do this, right? It's, for me, it's a series of events that that we use to essentially bootstrap a movement. So yeah.
No, I mean, this is where the participatory part. My idea here is, I'm not sure if I've shown you. I should commit to. Hold on,
And
where is it? There's it.
so we'll get to this and then.
Yeah. So
Niche.
I mean, it's just a card, right? But taken together, these form stories, so they can sort of be put up on the roadmap, kind of big wall kind of thing behind, sort of on top of the scene, right? So it kind of builds and builds and builds and builds. So yes, individual sessions, 3 or 4 of them, and on the scene and in front of an audience. But next time around, there's possibly some of different people, same roadmap, right? So it builds and builds and builds and builds, and eventually we have sort of connected enough dots. So it'll actually become easier. New people are coming in that obviously are briefed that this happened before, and now you fill in some missing dots here and there. And this is going to require a partially different skill set, because now they don't get to sort of expound on the full wheel as their want, because now they need to sort of fit themselves into something that went before. So, but I mean, I will stop there, because there's more to this, and we could sort of do this and add to some shared Google Doc or something. But I mean,
would love to chat more.
Yeah, I briefed some other people about sort of this whole participatory sense making thing, and there's a pretty good people that wanting to test this, and so there might be a deeper reason why we sort of did this whole long session now, because there's good stuff in here, and at least I will watch through it, and whatever.
If you do, could you just jot down where the good, like, this got said, it's just a quick summary, because it sounds like you're pretty good at summary. This got said at this moment. If you're able to do that, I will go back through and generate links for each of those moments. And that may be able to allow us to share smaller pieces that would be more appetizing for others to consume.
No, I mean, so the event angle, I can sort of put down links right about here where we talked about it. Another thing I will mention, and sort of go search and find where it is the whole sort of interoperability and gossip part. We touched upon that 3 separate times, I think. You also mentioned was another thing. Seek the boundaries of our abilities, which is kind of a deep enough, a good enough reason why. Why bother with interoperability? Why bother with gossip? Why bother with sort of having these chats and translation seminars and whatnot? Because we might actually be hardwired to seek the boundaries of our ability. That's why. So it's kind of.
And I think we are, yeah.
So I mean, we could be wrong, but it's. Actually, I don't think that's wrong.
No, we have a word for it. We call it play.
Yeah.
That's all play is. Play is our body's way of rewarding us for pushing the boundaries of our skill sets.
Yeah. That reminds me. Bernie de Coven will probably love to be part of this somehow further on, right? And possibly Steven Nachmanovich. They're both kind of written books about play, and they're also happen to be fun people to be around. So that's kind of an added. I mean, sometimes people.
It's a bonus.
I mean, people have written kind of worthy poems, right, and tomes. They aren't always fun to be around with, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
good. That's not the trouble. The book was good, and here you have both, right? You kind
Yeah.
of a fun
Good
person to
work
be around,
and fun people.
yeah, and yeah, why not, right? Life is short, so why not do both? So,
Sounds great.
but I mean, I will talk myself doing that. Send you a couple of sort of timestamps, and other than that, big thanks, right?
Big thank you to you too.
And thankfully, Google didn't
Really,
do too much of a weird. We lost your image there for a moment, but you came back, and yeah, an
I
absolute
survived.
delight. Yeah. So,
Thank you, John.
cheers. Talk soon.
Cheers. Talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.